started. The stupid Xbox headphones. Welcome to another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland. We've got the crew, the whole entire crew. We've got bourbon sipping Mike. We've got LaCroix sipping Gage. And I'm drinking Bud Light. It's just not a good night. It's not a good night, but we're podcasting. So the 7 people who asked for this, here you go.
You're welcome.
All right. Let's just get right into this. I want to start big picture before we talk about the game. As we're recording this, it is Thursday night. The Brewers just won game 1. Good to the Brewers since they got every single player I wanted the Indians to get, but that's for the offseason. Let's just talk about this series. Let's go big picture. Indians, Astros. Guys, it sort of seems like we clinched this 7 months ago. I mean, just some general thoughts on the fact that the season has been – I mean, I love baseball season. Please don't take this the wrong way, but I think we're all on the same page. The season has been sort of boring.
Oof. Jim, you're not allowed to say that. It's just been so compelling.
Oh.
You mean you didn't enjoy watching Rajai Davis hit like 300 times this year? Is that what you're telling me? That wasn't fun?
Well – Tito is getting the lineup ready for this day, so that did make a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's why we got to see a whole 10 games of Kipnis in center field too, right, Jim?
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there.
No, but you're dead on. I lost interest in this season more than I have in any other Indian seasons that I can remember, and it's kind of a shame because there's some really fun players, but no competition in the Central.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to, 4 starters with 200 strikeouts, J-Ram, Lindor. It's not a boring team. It's just been a weird season, and I don't want to harp on this with the playoffs finally here. It's just, I don't know. I mean, is there – before we get into the metrics of all this, because that's what we do, is it possible that for 7 months you can sit there sort of stalling, waiting for all this to happen? I mean, we really haven't gotten to see the real lineup kind of all put together, ready to go. The bullpen, I don't, we haven't really seen Han, Miller, and Allen deployed the right way. Now we've got Bauer added to the mix. It almost feels like they're putting a bunch of pieces in place that haven't been there before. And at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter a whole lot. But are you worried at all that by the time they figure this out, we're sitting at like game 4 down 2-1?
I mean, I don't think I get where you're coming from, but I guess I haven't really thought of it that way. I could see a scenario staring down game 3 down 2-0 or staring down game 3 up 2-0. I think the pieces can gel at the right time in baseball. I don't know what do you think, Hattery?
I think deploying these pieces is really damn simple. I mean, I guess it is. I do kind of one of my favorite things about Francona is we do like the slow start, he's good in the second half thing, because he like refuses to play obvious major leaguers in the first half. Like, oh hey, Yandy Diaz makes your team better. Oh, that's really insightful. Yeah, that's stupid obvious. I don't know. It's just, and we're not gonna get it right. Like we're gonna hit Brantley second, who like is overpowered by righties with heavy fastballs and cannot hit left-handed pitching. And we're going to hit Josh Donaldson 5th. And Josh Donaldson may be our 2nd or 3rd best hitter. And it's just, I mean, I guess we can argue whether that matters or not. Whatever. I want to watch it and enjoy it, and I just won't.
Well, I mean, I guess, I mean, and I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, I don't really think any of us really think that. I just get concerned, I mean, deployment is always an issue for me. I mean, last year, we can get into who started when. I mean, that's all over with. We do have kind of the right matchups, I think, in game 1 and game 2 with Kluber. I mean, we can argue that too, but we got Kluber and Carrasco in game 1 and game 2. We're using Bauer, and with him coming off the injury, I mean, while we can argue, he is probably the best starter on the team, they're probably using him the right way. I mean, let's start with the rotation here, whole series. I think the way they're setting this up with Bauer being utilized early on in the bullpen, might be the best bullpen arm we have. I think Mike's probably hyperbole, is the best bullpen arm we have, even though he hasn't been in the bullpen. And then you've got Carrasco in the pen later. I mean, this is sort of kind of the geek out for us, because I think, Bauer has the potential to perhaps, pitch in 3, possibly 4 games, including a start. I mean, are the Indians set up to really utilize the rotation maybe twice through the lineup in both game 1, game 2? And then you, of course, have, big guns like Bauer ready to come in if you need them. It seems like our rotation is really set up to take care of our bullpen if our bullpen isn't up to snuff the way it's been looking over the past month. What do you guys, Mike, let's start with you. Like, what are you've got to be happy with the way this rotation is sort of setting up for this playoff series?
Yeah, I think this whole roster from a fit perspective might be the easiest and kind of most fascinating to deploy of this 3-year stretch. I mean, the bullpen is a little down, so I definitely would understand that disagreement. But I think this is one of the Indians' better benches. And then with Bauer and Bieber in these sort of flex positions where you can piggyback them, you can hold them off. I just think the tools are probably the best we've seen for Francona to be able to really manipulate matchups and create advantageous matchups. Everything that happens after that is just fucking bullshit playoff stuff. But, I mean, like, up till then, Francona has a ton of control and really good weapons to deploy, and it starts with the rotation.
Gage.
I agree completely with what he's saying, but I want to point out that I don't think the Bauer move to his fireman role or whatever, however they're going to use him, I think it's more about the rest of the bullpen than anything about Trevor Bauer's health. I think they're comfortable with where Bauer is, and I know that the Astros hit lefties better than maybe any team in the last couple decades. So I think there's a little concern there with what Cody Allen has been down the stretch. You need another powerful righty in that bullpen, in that fireman role, and I think that's why the move is Bauer. You're not going to throw Kluber there. Kluber has never pitched out of the bullpen. I mean, maybe I recall a couple times early in his Indians career, but Carrasco, they seem like they have set for that little start game 2, maybe come in and fill in back end relief role in game 4 or 5. I think Bauer was your only play if you want a power right-handed bullpen arm in a fireman role.
Do you see, I think the most intriguing part of this, and we'll get into game 1 here in a second, but I think when you look at game 3, the Indians obviously depended on what happens in game 1 and game 2. There's a lot of interesting things that could happen. Percentage, looking at the potential of, and I'm going to put Bauer in this, even though I think I think we're going to see him in game 1 or game 2, likely game 1. Percentage chance of who you see pitching game 3 between Clevenger, Bieber, or Bauer. Is it possible, given certain circumstances, that we could see even Clevenger used in the pen and not used as the game 3 starter? Perhaps you see Bauer in game 1, Clevenger game 2, and then you've got Bauer starting game 4 with Bieber sitting there in game 3. I mean, could you see a scenario like that? Or maybe Clevenger starts game 4 and you use some sort of like bullpen thing there. Game 3 starter, guys, who is it going to be? I suspect I know who you're going to say, but curious.
You can take this one, Hattery. I have some thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts.
It's got to be Clev. And To me, the only thing that's sort of fascinating is Clevenger, I think, is far more interesting to me later in games, especially that his control has taken a major step forward. And I think he can sort of ride up his velo. I don't know. I think starting's going to matter so much less in this series than we're predisposed to think it does. I think Bieber is like a dream 3-inning, like front end 3 and fly. And no matter how well he's pitching and no matter what the lead is, he throws 3 innings. You get him out of there, and Bauer throws 3 more in game 4 if you get to game 4, or, however those guys have to play in game 3. I think it's Clev, though.
I agree, unless they're down 2-0.
Corey.
No.
Rubber arm.
I think they're gonna. I think they will hold off on using Bauer in game 2, and I could see a scenario in which he opens per se game 3 if they're down 2-0 and gives you one time through the order.
Yeah,
I think. I mean, the playoffs this year, with managers using bullpen arms and in a way that I think, and Mike, you and I 5 years ago were talking about, how do you utilize a bullpen? Of course, I don't know if this is quite what we were expecting, but, by accident in 2016, the Indians were sort of forced to do stuff like this. This does feel like we're seeing, especially with certain managers like Kevin Cash throughout the year using, this bullpen role in similar fashion. This does seem like a trend that's starting here in the playoffs. And when I say that, multiple teams using it in key situations, it does feel like we're starting to have another one of those kind of transcendental shifts in baseball. We're going to see more of these specialized pitchers. And we've talked, all three of us have talked about whether or not this is good for the game or not. But it certainly is interesting. And the Indians seem better than anybody primed to do this with a bunch of arms. I mean, if you're talking about Clevenger possibly, you're talking about Bauer possibly, Carrasco in this role at some point. Of course, we haven't even talked about the bullpen yet, which we'll get to next. But, when you throw Miller into the equation, you throw Brad Hand into the equation, and you throw even a questionable Cody Allen into the equation, you're talking about in the past elite arms. I mean, the Indians could go toe-to-toe with anybody while keeping some starters off to the side. I mean, are the Indians better set up than the A's, better than set up than even Colorado and Milwaukee today, based upon this kind of combination of starters and bullpen arms that have all been utilized at one point or another this year in this kind of short-term role?
I would say that they're better suited by virtue of having 5 capable starters more than anything, instead of Milwaukee Oakland last night pushing Lou Trevino out there for 3 innings, which he was fantastic if anybody caught that. But you have guys that can give you 3 or 4, and if they're on, you can push harder into that 4th rather than 1 or 2 and fly. So I think there is a happy medium there, but I don't know. I just don't know about the bullpen depth, and I think that's why the Indians have to leverage that 5th starter in this division series to maximize their chances.
Can I complain for a minute?
Please.
Mike, have you heard our podcast ever?
What fundamentally bothers me is that, the Indians had 162 games to tinker, and they spent 2 games tinkering. It's not just the Jason Kipnis thing. I would have liked to see Bieber get 3 or 4 runs of, hey, you're only pitching 3 innings. Play up your stuff. See how it feels to max out for 3 innings, or press your levels for 3 innings. You have 2 months to completely dick around, and you just used it to get Melky Cabrera more at bats. Whatever. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think.
No.
I
Listen.
do think it's fundamentally interesting, but I also think there's something where it's oh, hey, Shane, we're going to try and do, or oh, hey, Trev, we want to do this really innovative thing that we had 2 months to try and set up, but we didn't, even though our games were meaningless.
Well, that's what I mean. I listened to one other podcast, and I only got through about 10 minutes of it because, we got into minute 6 and minute 7, and we're listening to things like, the Indians have been over the past 3 months setting up for this very moment. And, I find it hard to believe that the Indians at some level didn't think they were going to make a move to third base. You have the manager come out at one point saying, we're not moving Kipnis to center. And you have an option in Yandy Diaz. And we can talk about him. Regardless of that, it seems hard for me to believe that the Indians didn't fundamentally know they were going to get Josh Donaldson. It seems odd to me that they weren't putting Kipnis out there, regardless of whether they were going to use him there in the outfield, just to get him out there. So you can start with Kipnis. You can start with J-Ram moving to second base here and there so that he can refresh himself with a position that he pretty much dominated every year that he's played there. Now is trying to figure it out. And, yeah, it doesn't seem like he's primed to just figure it out against Houston. Again, he's, I would take a J-Ram mistake over some of the second basemen we've seen there in the past, including Kipnis himself. But you're 100% correct, especially with this bullpen. Miller's just been hurt. He's missed 3 months. Why haven't you been doing stuff that looks like it's the playoffs? They haven't really been setting up. They've just sort of been treading water. So, okay. I didn't yell, which I think is a plus. But Gage, since we're in our bitch session before we actually talk about the bullpen, anything you want to add to that? What's the one thing I think, we talk a lot off air. What's the one thing that drives you nuts about this team? And I know we could probably get into 2 or 3, but it is our podcast. It's what we do. What's the one thing that's driving you nuts right now?
What's driving me nuts is kind of similar to that point. You spent August and September with the division in the bag. And did any of your starters get an extended break?
Yes. Kill them.
Corey Kluber was pitching 8-inning, 115 pitches against the Royals in September. Maybe that's what he wants, but if you got the world champion manager of all managers, you think you can tell him, hey, we're just going to fabricate this little 10-day DL stint and abuse it and give you a 2-week rest. And they finally did it with Cody Allen when it felt like, okay, well, maybe now it's too late. And maybe you should have done this in mid-August when he couldn't stop giving up home runs. I just felt like it goes back to the same point. You had 2 months to tinker. Legitimately. You weren't blowing that division after August 1st. You had 2 months to tinker, and Lindor and Ramirez got about 3 combined off days over the last 2 months.
And that was the most egregious to me. Jose Ramirez looked like he couldn't hit a barn door at times. He was having a historic season, and he just looked beat in early September, and we're like, we'll give him a day off, and that's it. I also just fundamentally don't understand that. And Gage, hardcore plug, did a hardcore good piece on Jose Ramirez and sort of some swing adjustments and sort of tied swing percentage in the zone to his WRC plus decline, which is really phenomenal. So you street it. But I can't help but think that part of it is just that dude was burned. What are we doing? If he and Lindor suck in October, you suck. And if you can improve the odds of them not sucking by 5% by sitting them 2 more times in September, how the hell do you not do it?
Well, let's start with Gage's piece. It's for those that haven't read it yet, it's Finding a Slumping Jose Ramirez in Time for the ALDS. It was posted this morning at WFNY. Make sure you check it out. Gage makes a point, again, Mike mentioned it, talking about, how he was laying off pitches in the zone as opposed to attacking the zone early in the year. Gage, is it, reading your article and a fantastic article and you made it sound almost too easy. Let me throw something at you, kind of the twist of this. And Mike was alluding to this a second ago. It does seem like if he just swings more in the zone, we get to see a little bit more of that Jose Ramirez from the beginning of the year. But let me ask you this. how much fatigue is playing a part in the fact that he either doesn't feel like he can get around in the zone, so he's taking more pitches, or I don't know that there's a part two to that. I mean, how much fatigue is in the fact that he's not swinging at more pitches?
And I kind of made it sound too easy with a purpose, because it's kind of ironic, because I don't know how much he controls it. It's just kind of like it's all cyclical. It's the peaks and valleys that come with. And what was so impressive about him before August 15th of this season, when he started the massive decline, was how well he had avoided those valleys over the past 12 months. But he fell into a rut and just wasn't swinging at pitches that he capitalized on. Like, there's a specific quadrant of the zone that he specifically rakes, and that's down and away when he's facing righties. And he went from swinging at 70% of those pitches to 40%.
Yeah.
Like, that is his sweet spot where he's doing all his damage. And I think I mentioned in the piece, but it wasn't like a pitch recognition issue either, because he wasn't sitting there flailing at balls. His zone eye, his out of zone eye was fine. That's why it makes me think it was almost like a mental patience thing, which I want to tie back to the rest. Give him a few days off. Give him, if not for physical rest, just a mental reset. And the good thing is, and I kind of made it, the purpose of making it sound so easy is it appears that he's kind of coming back to form and starting to bring that swing at those pitches again over the past couple weeks. So I don't know. Maybe they were banking on the 4-day rest before the ALDS.
Well, it's possible, and I do think the playoff baseball does bring a certain different energy to this. But it is interesting that he was swinging less in the zone. I wonder how much fatigue is sitting in there, and the mental piece is interesting too. Mike, you've written a lot of pieces on Jose Ramirez. How worried are you about Jose heading into this series? I sort of feel like if there's anybody who can just break out of this, who can kind of, I guess we can call it kind of the Gage breakout at this point, who can sort of flip the switch. It seems like it's Jose. Are you as worried as that he's going to maybe put on a performance like he did in last year's ALDS? Or is he a guy that's primed to break out of this? Maybe he needs to read Gage's piece.
Maybe. No, you never know what's going to happen in 25 random PAs, but I just buy into this belief that dude is a freaking savant. I do, and I think if anyone he's shown a brilliant capacity to make counter adjustments, and I think one of the ones that Gage pointed to today was one of the things I pointed to potentially impacting Ramirez is this sort of 3% increase in breaking balls. But one of the things we saw that was sort of brilliant of Ramirez is he got way more breaking balls this year for the first 5 months, spit on them, and then just punished anything in the zone. And his eye is so discerning in terms of what he's willing to attack. And so, yeah, he got a little too passive for a month, but I really am in the Gage camp where I think it's just probably a lot of weird stuff happens in 1.5 month samples. And we have 2+ years of this guy being an offensive savant now. He went from a guy who walked 6% of the time and struck out 10% of the time to a 14% walk rate guy who's hitting a ton of dingers. And you can see, you can track, looking at how he's attacking the zone over a 2.5-year period, how he's just channeling in on certain sectors of the zone and cutting out swings at certain eye levels. Just absolutely brilliant adjustments that you don't see others make. So, yeah, I think he can go fucking nuts in this series, and I hope he does because it'll be so fun.
Well, I agree. Go ahead, Jim.
I think what's interesting, you mentioned the walk rate, and I think if you go back to early podcasts for CSI HC when we talked about Jose Ramirez and what might limit his ceiling, we specifically talked about him getting on base. I don't think, obviously the power is a shock, but that walk rate jump is insane to me. I think it's something we never saw coming. And I want to let Gage talk here too, but I want to segue into the piece that you wrote today, Mike. I'll get to that in a second because you did talk about Justin Verlander against the Indians. And just kind of listening to Gage and you talk about Jose Ramirez, kind of my thoughts on Jose over the years, it does sort of feel like the one guy, and you didn't really key on him in your piece, Mike, and I want to focus in on your piece in a second, but doesn't it feel like, and I want Gage to start off with this, but I want you to come back to this, Mike, since you wrote that piece, and I'm referring to Mike's piece today, the Cleveland Indians versus Justin Verlander piece. And just a real quick segue, guys, if you're the people that are listening to this, hopefully you're listening to this before the game tomorrow, or today if you're listening to this on Friday, please make sure you hit WFNY. I mean, Gage and Mike have been working on the chess pieces, kind of string along at WFNY. There's, I don't know, guys, like 8 pieces in that. So 6, 8 pieces.
Yeah, there's 5 or 6 that are marked with it now.
I mean, just get into WFNY and run the last string of Mike's pieces, run the last string of Gage's pieces, and you'll be all set for the series. What do you guys think, pointedly, with Verlander coming into this game? And we know he lives upper middle zone and likes to pitch out of the zone. I mean, I think obviously he's going to try to stay away from Ramirez in the zone. I mean, could Verlander be the perfect pitcher for Jose Ramirez to break out of his slump? Gage, I'm going to start with you. Start with your original point before I interrupted you, and then swing over to Mike. What are you thinking, Mike, after taking a look at Verlander, looking at game 1? Let's start with you, Gage.
No, I was actually, my point kind of segues into your point. If the only flaw that I could find in Jose's peripherals was the zone percentage, just not swinging at pitches in the zone. And I have a feeling that kind of thing plays down, if you will, in the playoffs, because I think hitters are going to be more aggressive. We saw Jose walk twice in his 20-something plate appearance last year. I think by nature, hitters and pitchers are more aggressive in trying to find the zone. You might see some pitchers with command problems, but Verlander isn't a guy who's going to sit there and nibble the whole way through the lineup. I think the Indians are going to see a lot of strikes tomorrow. And I think, like you said, J-Ram, he's not, like Mike mentioned, he's not Lindor against those high voltage fastballs, but I believe that his aggression will play in his favor against a guy like Verlander.
Yeah. What's also pretty fascinating to me, Ramirez has this sort of strange nitro zone against right-handed pitching that is the inner third against breaking balls, which is when they try and throw that back foot slider or the curveball to the back foot, but they leave it up a little bit, he has the quickest hands in baseball, I think, in terms of just he'll just flip that ball out to right field, over the fence. He's made a killing doing that this year.
I just want to interrupt and say that's the most aesthetically pleasing thing to see when you're watching that on TV is him turning on that lower in breaking ball.
It's stupid. It's stupid good. And so I think that to me is the piece I'm watching for with him and Verlander and the interaction. I just think they're different. And I keyed in on Lindor and I keyed in on Brantley because I wanted to talk about sort of matchups where there were really obvious weaknesses and there were really obvious strengths. And how does the player try and hide that? Michael Brantley just, I don't know if it's bat speed or what it is, but he does not do well with an elevated fastball with good velocity. He can't. He just doesn't drive the ball in that scenario. And so I'm really interested to see how patient he is and whether he's actually just sitting breaking ball the whole time and hoping he gets one in the zone. But yeah, I think Ramirez is a really good match for Verlander just because he's a really good match for every pitcher in baseball. He's really freaking good. He's a top 5 player in baseball. He's gonna do stuff. I don't know. What do you think, Jim? What are your thoughts?
I mean, obviously I think Ramirez is the key to the game. I think he's the key to this series in that, if he's even remotely close to the guy he was, prior to mid-August, I mean, I think that we've got the best player in the series, and that's always a plus. When you're talking about a lineup that includes Lindor, Brantley, Encarnacion, and then a guy that we haven't had a chance to talk about on the podcast yet, Josh Donaldson, even against, I'm really intrigued, even though it's a righty-righty matchup, I'm really intrigued with Josh Donaldson against Verlander in this series because Josh Donaldson, I mean, I mean, we argue a lot about a lot of different things. I cannot recall a second of any of us arguing about Josh Donaldson's addition to this team being a plus, as we've spent the past we spent the past month trying to figure out how to sign him long term because there's nothing else to talk about. But so looking at Josh Donaldson, specifically adding to this lineup, if you have Jose Ramirez, tomorrow lighting things up, I mean, you've lengthened this lineup massively with Josh Donaldson, and it makes the bottom of our lineup at least interesting, dependent on who's in there. I'm trying real hard not to talk about the Melky Cabreras and, is Yan Gomes healthy, and, how long do they keep Jason Kipnis in the game? Are they going to keep him in the whole game? Should he even be starting ahead of Greg Allen at this point? I don't know. But let's focus on Josh Donaldson for a second. And Mike, I'll go to you first on this one. A huge addition. I mean, one of the most understated additions, I think. I know they made a big deal about how we got him and the whining and bitching from all the big market teams, but rarely does a player make impact the way I think Josh Donaldson can in the playoffs, just because of the type of swing that he has and the type of player that he is, even defensively. What role does he play in this? I mean, we literally added an MVP candidate from past years to our team, and he seems to be playing like that MVP candidate. Mike, Josh Donaldson, how do we sign him long term? No, I'm just kidding.
So, man, this is the thing. I really think we've slept on. I think we're seeing like Josh Donaldson from 2016 again. I'm crazy like that. I mean, let me pull the data here because I'm a little slow.
Wait, hold on. While you're saying that, when you say we, I think you really need not to say we. Don't say we, because I think that, I mean, I don't know how many times we've implicitly stated the 2016 comps, but I think we're all probably, I mean, I was just watching Gage nod there, and I'm trying to buy you some time here, Mike, but I think without looking at numbers, I think that we're seeing, I've seen some exit velocities that have been very interesting, and he's launched some balls that obviously we haven't seen from him in a long time. But Mike, I'm assuming that your iPhone 1 has pulled up the data.
Yeah, my cat's having a coughing fit, which is problematic. But nonetheless, I mean, partially because the last month didn't matter, but Josh Donaldson posted 150 WRC plus when he was with the Indians, which is like basically peak MVP candidate Josh Donaldson. And obviously we have other sample size where he was like pretty mad, where he was hurt, but like when you have someone who regularly does something and then they're healthy and they're doing that thing again, it's not unreasonable to draw the conclusion that they're probably still very good, which makes hitting him fifth absurd, but that's fine. But I think one of the things with Donaldson that's really interesting is when I went to do this pitcher preview piece, I was like, how would I attack Josh Donaldson? That was one of the things I just sort of wanted to look at. And the reality is he's just one of those guys who, when he's healthy, is a top 10 player in baseball who's really hard to attack. He hits hard stuff. He hits soft stuff. He's disciplined. He hits for power. He can do it against righties. Like he has, I think, 130 career WRC plus against righties and 160 against lefties. I mean, he just does it against both. And I think there's something here where, man, that guy's hitting fifth.
Yeah, well.
You want to talk about hitting savants? You mentioned Jose Ramirez. You ever hear Josh Donaldson talk hitting?
Yeah.
That guy, he doesn't look the part, but there's a ton going on upstairs.
He sort of does, though. I mean, he looks like a baseball. I mean, I just is there anybody who looks more like a baseball player than Josh Donaldson? I mean, what else? He's either a baseball player or, I don't know, like a ditch digger.
My boy's wicked smart.
Oh, I need that accent again. I need that Ben Affleck again.
It's not coming back. It's not coming back. Unless I need to inspire you to leave the brickyard.
I could spend a whole podcast talking about that movie after listening to a podcast about that movie. But anyway, I think he's a freak of nature when it comes to hitting. He talks about where he's going to get the ball. And last year, Saris, formerly of Fangraphs, now with The Athletic, did a piece that will always stick with me, talking about point of contact, where about hitters going and getting the ball in front of the plate. And if you just watch Josh Donaldson when he's hitting, you can tell he's hunting that ball down before it gets to the plate. And there are very few times where he gets buried deep in on the hands or deep. He's going and attacking the ball. He had a grand slam last Friday night in that meaningless game that I felt like off the bat as somebody else, you'd expect it to be a 200-foot pop-up. But that thing carried 400 feet.
He crushed it, yeah.
I just enjoy watching him hit and just throwing the numbers out for a second, just watching him hit, because it's an art form, almost like J-Ram, where J-Ram kind of feels more innate to me. It feels like he's just worked at it for so long and then it's there. I don't know if I'm making the correct analogy, but I think if you talk about hitting savants, you have to mention Josh Donaldson.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, I guess, he's probably hitting fifth. I mean, I don't want to make this podcast about where do we move him, because he's not going to hit anywhere other than fifth. But let's hold off on that. I want to talk, before we get into that, I want to talk Kluber specifically, like how long do you think we'll see him? I know in 2016, they were looking at Kluber. I mean, obviously they needed Kluber to go long in some games, but I think optimally, and we saw a little of this, I guess, last year in the tail end of 2016, but I think optimally you want Kluber, peak Kluber is, I mean, peak Kluber, I mean, we can talk about what we've seen this year. And Mike, I'm going to start with you again, only because you've been talking about this all year. I guess Pete Kluber is throwing more curveballs and probably not facing the Astros in a playoff series a third time. I mean, are we looking at a 5-inning Kluber start tomorrow? And do you see the potential? He's been, obviously leaning a lot on the four-seamer this year, throwing less curveballs. I mean, you've been talking behind the scenes, even on Twitter, and a couple of pieces that you've written that you might see a Kluber uptick in curveballs. Has he been holding back this year that pitch for the playoffs?
Yeah, this is a pet theory developed by Adam Burke, who obviously picks up on things before me very, very often. But one of the things is
the kid drinks so much. Like, I think the bourbon and beer, and it makes him so smart. Berkey, you're so smart.
So I think what's pretty fascinating is, like, let's just take the slider from 2017, and it's like, from about June on, he's sitting 25% and above. And this year, he's throwing at 20 to 22% all year. And then in September and October of last year, he's throwing at 35 and 40%. So I think once again, we're just going to see one of these things where it's like, he's throwing the slider 40% of the time tonight. Like, that's going to happen. And Gage documented this pretty well. And I think something we're talking about is just like, I think Brooks Baseball does a really good job of sort of like scoping in what's curveball and slider, but a lot of them are pretty similar, and defining them is difficult. And Gage really keyed in on how the best way to attack the Astros offense probably is heavy curveball usage. It's something they've really struggled with, and to a lesser extent slider. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see 40% slider from Kluber. I think we're going to see some more slurvy breaking balls, which he breaks out sometimes. He has that tight slider, and then he has that loopier slurvy thing. I think we're going to see that a lot.
Can I play the Debbie Downer role for a second here?
God damn it, Gage.
Gage, fuck you, Gage. God dang it! What the heck?
I'm mortified about.
Can't we just have one sit down where I say something and you just fucking agree with it? Like, honest to God, like, just shut the hell up and agree. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I'm not mortified. See, Kluber's down is 90% of pitchers where they wish they could be.
But this is all valid, by the way. I'm just busting chops because you have talked about this all year, and of course, I've always countered with, I know he's down, but his FIP's pretty good. His xFIP's pretty good. It's not as good as last year, but it's still better than everybody else's. And his ERA is pretty good. And he still struck out 200 and some, and he still pitched, over 200. But I think, and Mike and I have gotten hammered for this in the past because how many times we've said, yeah, this is it. He's done. He's freaking done.
I think we said the aging curve comes for everyone, Jim, to defend us. And it does. We all die. We're all dying.
Everyone except Jason Kipnis, okay?
Yeah.
So anyways, I just want to preface all this with the fact that I think Mike and I in several podcasts have declared the end of Kluber, have taken literal hell for it. So he's saying he's down a little bit is probably not quite on that scale. So as much as I'm busting your ass on this,
I'm not calling this the end. I'm not calling this. I'm not saying he's going to fall into a well in the Indians' dugout and never appear again. I'm saying
like that's what you're saying, Gage. I don't know what to tell you.
Francona still thinks he's got 2017 Kluber or 2014 Kluber in his bag, and I'm kind of worried about how that progresses in the 4th and 5th and 6th innings And I mean, Kluber of these ALDS games, I mean, Kluber can ramp up his curveball or slider, whatever you want to call it, breaking ball usage. And I agree with Burke and Hattery that he's probably going to, but I'm still worried about that fastball being down a couple ticks.
Well, I mean, and what it seems like when he gears back, especially as the game progresses, it does feel like, I think the one worry everybody has with Kluber is with that down tick a little bit in velocity. Gage, that we see that ball rise up a little bit, and if that ball rises up against this Astro team, they're going to just destroy him.
I mean, yeah, and you saw guys like Daniel Palka, or however you pronounce him, 5th hitter on the White Sox name, Matt Davidson, they were even keying in on it a little bit. So when those guys turn into Marwin Gonzalez and George Springer.
Marwin Gonzalez. Stop it.
Marwin Gonzalez is a pet project of mine.
I like him. He can play. But come on.
Oh, how about Yuli Gurriel?
Ugh, God, he's a prick.
they didn't carry Evan Gaddis, so.
You mean Eric Haas? They're the same person.
Yeah, except for Gaddis actually puts his bat on the ball.
Oh, shut up. It's a 10 PA sample.
Did Gaddis ever go over 5 with 5 Ks in AAA?
Pretty sure he's probably done that like 20 times.
I'm pretty sure. I think there's an article.
I will look at that, but I am almost certain. Okay, so here's my pitch. Here's my pitch back.
Okay.
I get that. His second worst pitch is his cutter, which he's thrown second most of any pitch this year. And he's just going to be cutting the hell out of his cutter usage. Not to overuse the word cut too much. He's going to be ramping up the slider, which is maybe one of the 5 best pitches in baseball. And so, yeah, I mean, he's not a 2-time Cy Young Award winner this year. Like, he's not as good, but he's also still like one of those 10 guys you want on the mound when it matters.
I'm pretty sure you just quoted 7 other podcasts right there.
He wants to be in the room where it happens. That's all I want.
I need to spin this back to the weird thing where Kluber's not human, and maybe that makes all these concerns irrational. Have you ever looked at his splits? Bodie and I were talking about this the other day. His splits the 3rd time through the order.
I have.
It's gross.
So dumb.
The weighted on base average. That's when he's best. Is when he's facing hitters a 3rd time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that brings back to the original point. Like, what are we going to see? Playoff baseball is a different thing, but we are talking about Francona here. I mean, Kluber's his guy. If he's pitching well, does he leave him in? Would you leave him in? Let's start with you, Gage. I mean, is this just a scenario where 2nd time through or 5th inning, 6th inning, you're just going to pull Kluber to bring in your fresh arm? Or, I mean, do you ride your ace?
I might be in the minority from a lot of people on this, but there are certain guys in the majors that I think you ride when they're pitching well. And Kluber's one of those guys. Carrasco's one of those guys. Bauer's one of those guys. I was kind of upset. Yeah, Verlander, Keuchel, Cole, all of those guys. I was kind of upset when Carrasco got pulled in New York last year. I think it was he allowed a hit in the 6th inning or something like that. And I get the splits arguments, and I just think there are some guys that you just let roll. And Kluber definitely, even with my negativity earlier, I let him roll and deal.
I don't know. Like you just played both sides of the coin. You just played both sides. You're just being contrary now. I just Mike, just go, because I'm gonna. I got nothing.
Yeah, they're gonna be fine.
What do you think, Mike? Like, I mean, I think I've in all the reading that I've done, I've seen a lot of talk about, just the kind of straight line, with the Indians with Trevor Bauer. Like, you pull your starter in the fifth, bring in your fresh guy, especially since it's arguably the best pitcher in the entire Indians team this year. I mean, where are you with? I mean, this is Kluber that we're talking about. This is a guy that obviously has been key for us in the 2016 playoffs. He wasn't the same last year for a variety of reasons. Like, are you worried about stamina being an issue? You talked earlier about, how they didn't, how they've used him, just basically used him up this year. That's overstating it a bit, but I mean, where are you with this? I mean, you just kind of play it. Do you play the gut like we know Francona is going to do, or are you just going to be locked into kind of a strategy where, you get through the second, you maybe, if he's facing a guy or two that he's pitched well against, you leave him in and then you pull him for Bauer early.
Yeah, I'm trying to steal this. I think sort of conceptually similar. Travis Sawchuk, who is brilliant, writing at 538 now, put out this really cool piece on reliever usage. One thing that I found super fascinating was they posted this infographic showing like reliever first and second time through the order versus starter first, second, and third time through the order. And I think Cleveland was the only team in the playoffs where their starting pitchers third time through the order were still better than their bullpen first time through the order in 2018, which is fairly dark, and I think probably not representative of where we are now. Obviously, when you're going to be deploying Bauer, Hand didn't get in till the second half. I think it's obviously going to be a little different, but I also think it is pretty representative of what you and Gage were both noting with Kluber and Carrasco, which is like these guys are pretty good deep in games, and Bauer's very similar. That's kind of the sad part of like Bauer not being able to throw 8 innings in the playoffs this year is like that dude is so good the third time through as well now, just because he gets the game theory components so well and he knows how to adapt. So, I mean, I think you'll see a longer leash with Indian starters than you'll see with most other teams, just because the marginal value gap between their starters and relievers doesn't really offer the same value proposition that it does for a lot of other teams.
So are we looking at this bullpen? I guess we sort of have to wrap this up at some point, but are we looking at this bullpen? It's funny to say that we have, if you had told me 2 years ago that we were going to have in 2018 Brad Hand, Andrew Miller, and Cody Allen, I would have been ecstatic. And I'm not saying that I'm not. I mean, obviously, I'd rather have those three than not. But where are we? Obviously, in theory, you start with those three, and I don't even want to get into the depth. I think we all agree that the depth is suspect. And hopefully we won't have to dig into that depth, although I think we've noticed with all the playoff games so far that depth and bullpen is going to be pretty important. But maybe the Indians, as Gage mentioned earlier, are kind of tough up against that with our starting rotation. But, Gage, how do you feel about this bullpen? I don't want to talk about Carrasco yet because in theory I want to try to maybe throw up a pod if we can get one tomorrow. I'm talking specifically about Carrasco, but talking about this bullpen, how do you fit this bullpen into the big picture? How do you make it effective? We've had so many conversations about Andrew Miller, sort of like, you have a 14-year-old dog, and I'm not comparing Andrew Miller to a 14-year-old dog. I guess I kind of am. You have a 14-year-old dog who like some days wakes up and, looks like the 2-year-old version of himself. And then other days he wakes up and you have to carry him down the steps to go to the bathroom. I guess it's a really bad metaphor, but I'm going with it. We sort of been talking about Andrew Miller with that. We've gone back and watched a lot of his appearances. He's sort of still trying to figure out if he can unleash. And it seems like when he's doing that, he's not quite sure where everything's going to go. But when it goes where he usually goes is Andrew Miller. And when it doesn't, he gets tagged pretty good. Mike's mentioned this. He mentioned this with Mark Schwab the other day on TV. Cody Allen is not Cody Allen. I mean, it's long past arguing about that. And I guess Brad Hand is probably right now at least the most consistent guy in the pen. I mean, Gage, starting with you, like, how do you feel about this bullpen?
I think even though Andrew Miller is a 14-year-old dog, apparently,
I'm hashtagging that. I'm owning the shit out of that.
When you throw a bone in front of a 14-year-old dog for a few days in a row, he can still have a little life under him. And I think the postseason, I wouldn't be surprised to see Andrew Miller and maybe not Cody as much, but Andrew Miller, the way he pitched at the end of September, I wouldn't be surprised to see him be 90% of what he was a couple of years ago. And the other caveat here is he's not being asked to be the most important pitcher on this team. In a 5-game series, you have, as far as importance goes, I'll lob this over to you guys too, but I think first, if you're going to use a 4-man rotation, your starter is the most important, your number 1 starter's the most important, and then your number 1 and number 2 relievers. For me, that's how I would. What do you think about that, Hattery?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I agree.
So I think that's why you kind of leverage Bauer into that 2 or 3 that top reliever role, because now you have Corey Kluber going twice in games 1 and game 5, and you have Bauer and Hand being able to get their fingerprints on 2 to 3 games each, and the fingerprints being 2 to 3 innings probably. I think Brad Hand can give you 2 innings for sure. So I'm pretty comfortable with where the bullpen's at, even with Miller and Miller and Allen question marks. I think you can play Bauer and Hand up enough, and as long as you have a stable number 1 starter, I think you're going to be all right.
Mike, is this feeling? Gage, you sort of described maybe the opposite of what we saw in 2016. Mike, is that what this playoff, run may be all about? We obviously have one of the top 2 or 3 rotations in baseball. Are we somehow showcasing that the bullpen isn't the most important part of a baseball team, especially the Cleveland Indians this year?
Yeah. I think, too, we're going to see that the starting rotation is still really important. They're just going to be – yeah. I think damn it. I think we're going to see a really interesting interchangeability of rotation arms that's reflective of more how the Tampa Bay Rays see baseball. And it's partially going to be because the bullpen isn't that good and the starting rotation is amazing. And the starting rotation, you don't need to use all of them, so you move them around. I will say I'm less nervous about Miller. I'm weirdly high on Miller. I also love how good Andrew Miller's been, that we see a 350 FIP and a third of his innings he was clearly pitching hurt, and we're like, man, what a down year from this guy.
I know.
That's great. That guy's still a good reliever, I think, and I think he can be pretty tight. Cody Allen, I think, is done. Or at least there's something structurally wrong. I don't buy into pitching Cody Allen in high leverage. I would rather Bauer, Hand, and Miller by a pretty large margin. But yeah, we're going to be – I do think the scariest possible thing, and one that I don't know if the Indians can survive, is if Bauer has a really bad game 1 and is out in the 3rd, there's just this sort of cascading effect with how you'll be able to deploy Bauer the rest of the series. So then you're just going to have to go back to leaning on Allen more and Miller a lot more instead of picking your spots with them. And so I think if you end up in that situation, that's the one thing that's pretty dangerous to me. I like how they can move all these pieces around, but if you don't get enough of that innings percentage from Kluber, you're in big trouble.
right, we do have to wrap things up here. Looking at the series, we didn't really talk about the Astros a whole lot. Game 1, you got, Verlander on the hill. Game 2, you've got Cole on the hill. In Game 3, you've got Keuchel on the hill. I guess, I sort of hate doing this, but where do you see this series going? I mean, obviously, I think all three of us are fairly high on the Indians' chances in the playoffs. This is an interesting series. I think if you'd have told me 7 months ago, and I think we actually talked about this very scenario 7 months ago, in the American League, at least with the teams that we're set to face with the Astros, Yankees, and Red Sox all involved, I think we certainly face up better with the Astros. I think we all agree there. Where do you see the series going? I think obviously we'll be talking again between now and the finish to this series. But Mike, let's start with you on this. Where do you see this series going? I don't care what your predictions are. You can predict a series win for somebody. You can predict something that happens. How do you see the series going between now and the end of it?
I think they're going to play a couple games in Houston, and I think they're going to play 1 or 2 games in Cleveland.
And possibly a 5th game in Houston. Okay. EHC. Whoop, whoop.
I also will note that if they score more runs, they will probably win. I don't know. I just your stars have to be stars. And I just think that Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor, and this is so stupid and so anti-analytics because it's like, oh, it's a 20 PA sample and like stupid shit will happen. But I just think the Indian stars get how to be stars again. Like, I just think that Lindor and Ramirez are going to have a monster series. And if those guys both have big series, it's going to be really hard for the Indians to lose. That's all I got. But I think Lindor is going to have a big series. I think that one of the Astros' big strengths is leveraging high fastballs. Their entire rotation, if you look at it. If you look at Garrett Cole, if you look at Charlie Morton, if you look at Justin Verlander, their big strengths are pounding fastballs high with high spin rates and high velocity. And Lindor eats that stuff up. So I think like one of the most interesting things is like that dude's got to eat this series. And if he does, they're in big trouble.
Gage, toss it over to you.
I want to say that I've been seeing several pieces tossed around talking about Josh Donaldson being the X factor, and that's all well and good. I think it's kind of because he's this former superstar who just joined the team more than anything to do with his skill set. Your X factors are who Hattery mentioned. They're J-Ram and Lindor. They don't survive this series without those two hitting. They can survive a series with a down Donaldson, even though I think he's as good as he was in 2016. I'm with Mike on that. But over a 20-something PA sample size, I could see weird things happening with him. I don't think you win the series without Ramirez and Lindor. And I'm not trying to cop out and jump on and piggyback on Mike's response, but I think J-Ram is going to have a huge series just because it's baseball, and he's been eerily quiet for a month and a half, and one of the best hitters in the game just doesn't stay eerily quiet.
Well, I mean, obviously the Indians, have ridden those bats all year. I think the real game in this series, with the starting pitching on both sides, obviously key for both teams. I think we could see some low-scoring games. The funny thing is we have some players on both teams in the bottom of the lineup, in the middle of the lineup that we haven't talked about at all, like Edwin Encarnacion, who heated up a little bit last playoffs until he got hurt. It could be one of those series where, we have a couple of games where Lindor and J-Ram do carry it. But I do think, when we talk about these fringe guys, and I don't know if that's the right term for guys like, Edwin Encarnacion, even Jason Kipnis, I do think one swing of the bat in a series with this pitching could be a big deal. And while most likely those swings are going to come from J-Ram, Francisco Lindor, even Michael Brantley, Josh Donaldson, I do think that there's a place for a big swing from someone else. So I do think the Indians are going to win this series. I think they're going to win it in 4 games. I think that their pitching top to bottom and the way they can deploy it is the most interesting thing to me. I don't think game one matters that much. I do think that the Indians can withstand a Kluber loss, but we shall see. It's going to be a fun series. Go ahead, Gage.
No, I just want to add, there's something with the Astros hitters that just they're kind of hobbling into this. Correa's got a bad back. He's been suffering all year. Altuve was on the DL in August, I think, and Springer has sat out or missed a couple games here and there down the stretch because of some awkward landings in a wrist or elbow, whatever it was. Some of their biggest pieces, besides the freak Alex Bregman, who's been perfectly healthy and raking, but some of their biggest pieces are just kind of question marks on the health side for me. So I think the Indians have a little bit of an advantage there, especially because they have all these right-handed starters to throw at a team that just rakes against lefties and is only a little bit above average against righties.
All right, we'll end things there. Gentlemen, I haven't been writing anything, so I have absolutely nothing to plug, nor do I plan to plug anything other than this podcast. Michael, anything you'd like to plug?
Read my pitcher previews because they're really long and they take a lot of time, and if you don't, I'll be offended.
And God damn it, we got to listen to all that shit. He DMs us, tells us, God, no one's listening to ours. Only 1,000 people have read my stories.
You know how many graphs I have to download, Jim? That's a lot of graphs. You know how many graphs I end up reading? Like 70, and 5 end up in the column.
And guess how many I've had to download? Zero. Gage, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I had fun with the Jose Ramirez piece. That, if you want to go out there and read that, it was just kind of a cool concept for me, at least from my point of view. And definitely go read Hattery's pitcher previews. They're worth your time, especially if you want to know anything about where that pitcher likes to pitch or what Indians can take advantage of it. They're very, very interesting.
All right. With that being said, to all of you who wanted this podcast, here it is. If you want us to do it again, what you need to do is listen to this, because if you don't, then I'm going to be bitching. So make sure you listen to this, do all the follow us on Twitter, all that fun stuff. My one simple shout out goes to, if you listened this far or listened at all, John Grimm. EHC podcast would have never happened without you. Thanks for being part of the team. We're glad you're back. Thanks for all the props on Twitter. Good luck with your new job. That's from all of us to you, man. So thanks for the shout outs. Yeah. There we go. All right. Make sure you listen to this podcast. Do it. Even if game one's over, because we talked about more than game one, even though you won't hear this. So what the hell? All right. Peace. Go Tribe.